So I did child abuse and children with special needs. So for the background, I picked a quote from the Prevent Child Abuse America, and it says, "It is generally believed that children with disabilities are abused more frequently than children in the general population." In 1993, the National Center of Child Abuse and Neglect research found that children with disabilities are abused 1.7 times more than other children. Most children with disabilities are abused because of society's responses to their disability more than it being because of their disability itself. Child abuse reports for children with disabilities are usually not supported with enough information on the case, like other child abuse cases, so their reports may not be considered trustworthy. Some contributions that I read throughout the article talked a lot about ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. So it talked about the association between that and developmental delay. The CDC describes adverse childhood experiences as potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood 0 to 17 years, such as experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence in the home, and having a family member attempt uh, suicide or to die. ACEs have been linked to a lot of risk factors, including health behaviors, chronic health conditions, low life potentials, and early death. Such as like how you can see over in the picture, it shows cancer, HIV, STDs, troubles with pregnancy, education and income. So it pretty much goes all across the board with the ACEs and how it can contribute to a child's risk factor of being abused. Some other contributions I read a lot in a lot of the articles that I had were stressors. Stressors are a huge part of child abuse and neglect on children with disabilities. Most factors leading to child abuse for children with disabilities is found to be similar to the general population, but some differences and stress factors would be feeling unprepared to handle the care for the child with a disability, having financial issues, or the stress of additional financial contributions such as medicine, hospital bills, etc., lacking social support or networks from family and friends. And sometimes it could be linked to high divorce rates because if there isn't a strong parental caregiving relationship between the parents, it can cause a lot of stress on the child. Also, can cause abuse within the home, which can cause these ACEs to come in and cause the child to be at a greater risk. My research articles that I picked, my first one would be exploring risk for abuse of children with chronic conditions or disabilities, parents' perceptions of stressors, and the role of professionals. So the purpose of the research was to find out if children with chronic conditions or disabilities were at higher risk for abuse. Svensson, Erickson, and Jansen conducted a study by doing in-depth interviews with 15 parents of children with disability or chronic conditions. During these interviews, many of the parents stated that they felt like they were too hard on their kids. And then my second article I did was child maltreatment and autism spectrum disorder and intellectual disability results from population-based sample. I picked this one just because it was more focusing on a specific disorder, but also focusing on the intellectual disability factor of it. So in this study, it discussed the risk factors for abuse in children with disabilities. Children with developmental disabilities are at higher risk for abuse. A child who has an intellectual disability or autism spectrum disorder or both have higher odds of providing abuse odds of proving abuse. Overall, abuse in children with autism spectrum disorder was linked to hyperactivity, aggression, and temper tantrums. And then over here, I have just a little diagram that shows the three major components that can conclude to risks of abuse for the child, which explains the parent-child relationship and the professional support and social norms. So with these, with it having a low negative impact, it can cause a high risk for abuse. And then my final research article I did was association between adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and developmental delay of preschool children in rural area of Colombia. Experiencing traumatic events, ACEs, at an early age was a huge focus on the study because it wanted to see how a child going through traumatic experiences and how that would affect them when they got older developmentally. So they conducted a study by using surveys and interviews with parents. And the ACEs interviews usually conduct of questions, and at the end you receive a score. And if the score is 4 or higher, it shows that the child is at a high risk for developmental delay. But also over here, I have a picture that shows the other things that ACEs also looks out for, which is early death, disease, disability, social problems, adoption of health risk behavior, social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, which is a huge thing, especially with children with disabilities because they're so vulnerable. So being able to look out for them emotionally is a huge thing because, yes, they have a disability, but like I said earlier, it's more of the society and how they react to their disability more than it is the disability itself. So being able to be there for the child when it comes to society norms is a really big thing when trying to prevent risk factors of child abuse. So I have a video where I want to talk about why ACEs is important. I wanted to focus on that a little bit more just because I think it is. It's such a huge part in child abuse and the overall outcome as what a child becomes in adulthood. So here's the video. It's only 59 seconds. So So, some key facts that I wanted to point out in that video were 1 out of 6 adults experience 4 or more types of ACEs, which was the diagram that I showed you in the last slide of the different categories. 5 out of 10 of the top leading causes of death are associated with ACEs, and preventing ACEs could reduce the number of adults with depression by 44%, which I thought was just such a huge thing to talk about because. Um, a lot of the times when we think about child abuse, we think about the here and now, but we also don't think about how a lot of people our age have probably gone through situations through ACEs when we were younger, and it has probably caused us depression, bipolar disorder, etc. So thinking about that when it comes to a child with a disability, it's it's like you have to take it a step further to really make sure that they're being understood and heard, because a lot of the times with everything that I talked about throughout this presentation, if we don't focus on that, a child could be lost and later end up in adulthood and kind of just thrown out there on its own. So being able to focus on that and wanting to change is definitely a big part of why I wanted to show that video. And here are my references, and thank you for listening.